So welcome back to part 3 of our slides, and this is very, very brief, just a few slides that I wanted to talk about friendships and enemies and relative mobility. So keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. When you think about it, who are your enemies? If you made a list, would you have many? Would you even have any? And who might they be? What did you think about the poem from Ghana? Beware of friends, some are snakes under grass, some are lions in sheep clothing, some are jealousies behind their facades of praises, some are just no good. Beware of friends. Here the enemy is a friend who can't be trusted. In a study with Ghanaian and American participants, when asked about enemies, 71% of Ghanaians in the study said that they had enemies compared to only 26% of American participants. More surprisingly, Ghanaians were more likely than Americans to say that their enemies were from their in-groups, groups that they could not leave or avoid. Americans, on the other hand, reported not having enemies because they could avoid people they didn't like. Why might that be? Here we come back to our ideas of in-group and out-group, interrelationships, and in collectivist societies with interpersonal relationships, and independent societies with individualized relationships. So the independent view of self is characterized by Americans or Western. The self is generally disconnected from other people, with more relational mobility and more freedom for people to choose the relationships in which they want to engage. With this perspective, it's easier for people to disengage from others, even if they're in their in-group. This is because with this flow between in and out groups, it's easier for people to form new relationships. With the interdependent view of self, which is characterized for a characteristic of Ghanaians, the self is intertwined within a web of relationships. Generally, there is less relational mobility, less freedom to choose the relationships in which they engage, and little choice in the people with whom they are affiliated. So there are people within their in-groups with whom they might not get along, and even to the point of being enemies. But because relationships are viewed as being stable, there's little ability to disengage or form new relationships. So things are summarized in this last slide. There are consequences of different types of relational mobility. People in cultures with high relational mobility have relationships that are more fluid and more casual. Advice is solicited. It's not just given. It's solicited because you can just walk away. Practical support is not emphasized, and there tends to be more friends than people in societies that are low in relational mobility. In high relational mobility, relationships can act like a marketplace where people are free to look for new relationships. So things like attractiveness and similarity are important factors. In contrast, people in cultures with low relational mobility have relationships that are more fixed and formal. Advice may be unsolicited and given all the time because you can't really say, mind your own business. Practical support is emphasized, and therefore people tend to be more cautious with their friends because they likely perceive friendships as being associated with social obligations. Factors of attractiveness and similarity play less of a role because relationships are generally relatively stable and few new relationships are struck. So I'm going to stop here, and then we'll finish up our slides by talking about attraction and marriage.